She called it a family decision. That was the phrase she used, a family decision, and she said it in the voice she reserved for things that were already done, the measured voice, the one that assumed agreement was a formality rather than a requirement. The cabin had been sold. The taxes had become impossible. There was no other way. She laid it out across the kitchen table like a set of reasonable facts, and I sat across from her and let her finish, and I watched her hands, folded on the table, perfectly still, and I thought about the folder in my bag.
I didn't open it yet.
Welcome back to Channel, where what people think they've settled is sometimes only what they haven't checked yet. My name is Nora. My grandmother Ruth bought a cabin on the Olympic Peninsula in 1988, and she kept it for 34 years, and it was the one place in my life that had always meant exactly what it looked like. My mother sold it while I was in a residential recovery program in the last week of my stay, without a phone call, without a conversation, without asking whether I might have something to say about a property my grandmother had put my name on 2 springs before she died. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ruth had filed a life estate claim with the county. Not just written it down, not just intended it. Filed it. Recorded it. The county recorder's office already had my name on that property before the sale closed. I pulled the folder from my bag and set it on the table. My mother looked at the folder. Then she looked at me. And that was the moment the whole thing shifted. But I should tell you how we got there, because the how is the part that matters. Ruth Calloway bought the cabin for $64,000 in the spring of 1988, when the peninsula was still the kind of place where that number was possible for a woman who had spent 30 years teaching elementary school and saved with the deliberate patience of someone who had grown up without much and intended to end differently. The cabin sat on 2.5 acres at the end of a gravel road, with a creek running along the eastern boundary and a stand of old-growth fir on the north side that made the property feel, even in summer, like it existed slightly outside of ordinary time. The nearest town was 11 miles away. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road, a retired couple named the Okamotos who had a vegetable garden and waved when you passed. Ruth had not bought the property as an investment. She had bought it as a place to be still. She spent her summers there from the time she retired in 1994, and she spent long weekends there in the shoulder seasons, and she opened it in the spring and closed it in the fall with a methodical attentiveness to the property systems that she approached the way she had approached everything in her life, as something worth doing carefully because careless maintenance was just deferred damage. My mother, Bet, had grown up with Ruth's patience and had found it confining. Bet was good at organizing things, at managing the surface of situations, at making sure the right people were called and the right forms were signed. She was less interested in what happened after the forms were signed, in the ongoing physical work of maintaining what you owned. She had visited the cabin perhaps a dozen times in 34 years. She had never once stayed for more than a long weekend. I had been going since I was 4 years old. I want to be precise about what that means because it could sound like sentiment, and it is not sentiment. It is a specific fact about where I spent my time and what I learned to do there. I learned to read the creek level by looking at the marker rock that Ruth had painted white on one side. When the water reached the upper white edge, it was high enough to be cautious of after rain. I learned to check the roof drains in November before the heavy rains came in, because the east drain had a slight pitch problem Ruth had never fully corrected and would back up into the eave if you didn't clear it. I learned to light the propane furnace using the manual pilot sequence because the electronic ignition had been unreliable since 2009 and Ruth had decided the workaround was simpler than the repair. These are not feelings I had about the cabin. These are things I knew about the cabin that nobody else knew because I had been there and they had not. The phone call from Bet came on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of March. I was 17 days from completing the residential program. The center had a phone room, a small room off the main corridor with 2 chairs and a landline, and the calls were scheduled 30 minutes each, twice a week. Bet called on Wednesdays and Sundays. The Wednesday calls were usually logistical. What was happening at home, what would need to happen when I got back, the practical scaffolding of reentry. This Wednesday call was different. She said she had something to tell me, and she wanted me to hear it from her before I heard it from anyone else. She said this as a preamble, which was how I knew the things she was about to say had already happened. I've been managing the cabin situation, she said. The property taxes came in significantly higher this year, The county reassessment put the value at $487,000, which moved the tax burden into a bracket that wasn't sustainable. I noted the number. I noted the word sustainable. I noted that she had not yet said what she had done. I worked with a realtor, she said. The sale closed last Friday. I held the phone and looked at the wall of the phone room. It was painted the particular off-white of institutional spaces, and someone had scuffed the baseboard near the door with what looked like the corner of a chair. You sold the cabin, I said. The situation required a decision, she said. I knew you were in the middle of your program, and I didn't want to add a burden to that process. I made the call that needed to be made. She said this without any alteration in her tone. She was not apologizing. She was explaining. There is a difference, and she has always been precise about which one she is doing. I let it sit. How much? I said. The sale price was $512,000, she said. After fees and the outstanding tax balance, the net is approximately $438,000. That will be distributed according to the estate structure. Which estate structure? I said. The one your grandmother's attorney set up after the probate, she said. I asked her which attorney. She said Gerald Ashby in Port Angeles. I said I would call her back. I hung up the phone and sat in the phone room for a while. The chair was a low armchair upholstered in a fabric that had been chosen for durability rather than comfort. I sat in it, and I thought about the east roof drain, and whether whoever bought the property would know to clear it in November. I thought about the creek marker rock. I thought about the propane furnace's manual pilot sequence, the specific order of the steps, the way Ruth had written them out on an index card and taped it to the inside of the furnace closet door. Then I thought about the conversation I'd had with Ruth in the spring of 2019, 6 months before her diagnosis. It was a Sunday in April, and we were sitting on the cabin's back porch, looking at the creek. Ruth had made coffee and brought it out in the 2 ceramic mugs she kept specifically for porch mornings. They were heavy, wide-mouthed mugs the color of river clay, and she had bought them at a craft fair in Port Townsend in 1997 and had used them every summer since. She was particular about objects. She thought that objects used with care over a long time accrued a kind of value that had nothing to do with money. She said, without preamble, that she had been to see her attorney the previous week. I asked why. She said she had been thinking about what happened to the cabin after she was gone, and she had decided she wanted to be precise about it rather than leave it to interpretation. I filed a life estate provision, she said. You know what that is? I said I thought so, roughly. She explained it in her own terms. It was a recorded document that established a protected interest in the property for a named party. It meant the property could not be sold or transferred without that party's written consent. It sat on top of whatever else was in the estate paperwork, like a lock that had to be opened before anything else could move. She looked at me over her coffee mug. I named you, she said. I said I didn't know what to say. She said I didn't need to say anything. I'm telling you because you should know it exists, she said. Not because I need you to do anything about it now. The document is filed with the county. It's recorded. If anyone tries to move the property without asking you first, the county already has your name. She looked back at the creek. You're the one who knows where the drain is, she said. She said it as if it were a complete sentence, which it was. After Ruth's diagnosis in October of 2019, the nature of my involvement with the cabin changed. Before the diagnosis, I came to the cabin the way I had always come for the spring opening for a week in August for the fall closing. I did the maintenance that came up, fixed what needed fixing, kept the systems running. It was a rhythm I had been in since my late 20s, reliable structure around which other things in my life organized themselves. After the diagnosis, I came more often, and I came for different reasons. Ruth's illness was the kind that moved slowly at first, and then quickly. In 2020, she could still make the drive up from Olympia on her own, and she spent her usual summer months at the cabin, and I came up every 3 weeks to do whatever had accumulated. In 2021, she could no longer drive, and I drove her 4 times over the course of the year, the 2-hour trip each way, Ruth in the passenger seat with her window cracked regardless of the temperature, because she said the air coming in from the sound was the best thing she knew of. In 2022, she could not make the trip at all. I went alone that year. I opened the cabin in April, checking the systems one by one the way Ruth had taught me. The water line pressure, the furnace ignition, the roof drains, the crawlspace vapor barrier, the propane level on the secondary tank. I checked the creek marker. The winter had been wet, and the bank on the east side had eroded about 8 inches since the previous fall. I photographed it, made a note, and came back in June with a load of riprap that I set myself over 2 days in the rain. The riprap job cost $340 in materials and 2 days of my time, and left my lower back in a state it took a week to recover from. I have the receipt. I have the photograph of the bank before and after. I kept records of everything I did at the cabin from 2020 onward, not because I was calculating anything at the time, but because Ruth had always kept records, and I had learned from her that the record was part of the care. In 2022, I also replaced the east roof drain fitting. The pitch problem Ruth had worked around for 13 years, with a proper corrected fitting that cost $178 and an afternoon on the roof in October. I recaulked the window seals on the north side, where the old growth fur blocked the sun, and the caulk deteriorated faster than on the south face. I serviced the well pump. I resealed the propane line fitting at the furnace that had developed a slight weep that I caught only because I had been in that closet enough times to notice the smell when it was barely there. None of this was asked of me. No one called me and requested it. I went because the cabin needed to be maintained and Ruth could not do it, and I was the only person who knew what maintaining it actually required. Beth sent a check for the propane refill in September of 2022. The check was for $180. The actual bill had been $347. Ruth died in January of 2023. The cabin went into probate. I kept going up. I opened it in April. I didn't ask permission. The property was in probate, and the probate would eventually resolve, and in the meantime the east drain needed clearing, and the water line needed to come back up to pressure, and the cabin needed to be a place that would still be sound when the legal process finished deciding what to call it. I went because the cabin did not know it was in probate. Beth came to my apartment on a Thursday evening in April, 3 weeks after I left the recovery program. I had been home for 23 days. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Tacoma, with a view to the east that showed, on clear days, the mountain in its particular way, present, enormous, and somehow always surprising. I had been finding my way back into the ordinary rhythms of being outside a structured environment. Cooking, sleeping on a schedule, walking in the morning, answering emails. I had also, in those 23 days, made 3 phone calls. One to Gerald Ashby's office in Port Angeles, the attorney Beth had named on the Wednesday call. One to the Clallam County Recorder's office. One to an attorney in Tacoma named Patricia Morse, who handled property and estate matters and had been recommended by a colleague. I knew, before Beth arrived, what the county recorder's office had told me. I knew what Patricia Morse had told me after I sent her a scan of the document from Ruth's filing box, the same filing box I had taken from the cabin's front closet the previous April when I came to open the property before the probate was resolved, because it contained Ruth's copy of the life estate provision, and I was not going to leave it in an empty cabin through the winter. I heard Betty's knock at 6:15. I opened the door. She came in and sat at the kitchen table without being asked, the way she always had, in the chair that faced the window. She was wearing a dark coat, and she did not take it off. She put her hands on the table. "I understand you've been making inquiries," she said. The phrase, making inquiries, was so precise in its implication that I almost said something about it. I didn't. "I spoke to Gerald Ashby's office," I said. "And to the county recorder." "And to an attorney, apparently," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at me with a careful face, not hostile, not warm, the managed expression that had preceded every significant conversation we had ever had. "The sale is closed, Nora," she said. "The funds are in the estate account. The process is done. The sale may be voided," I said. Something moved behind her eyes. "That is not a realistic outcome," she said. "The sale was handled correctly. Gerald reviewed it. The title company reviewed it. Neither of them knew about the life estate provision," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother filed a document with the county in 2019, I said. "It names me as a protected party on the property. The county has it recorded. The provision says the property cannot be transferred without my written consent. My consent was not obtained." The kitchen was very still. The refrigerator ran. Through the east window, the sky had gone the particular gray-pink of early evening in April. Ruth never mentioned any such document, she said. She mentioned it to me, I said. Beth unfolded her hands and refolded them. Nora, she said, you were in treatment. You were not in a position to be consulted about a property decision. I made the judgment that the right thing to do was to handle the situation and not add to your burden. I let it sit. The document exists regardless of what my position was, I said. I'm sure whatever your attorney has told you sounds persuasive, she said. But Gerald has been handling this family's estate matters for 15 years, and I trust his. Gerald didn't know about the provision, I said. I asked his assistant directly. It wasn't in the file they worked from. She stopped. The refrigerator's cycle ended. The kitchen went completely quiet. Beth stood. She picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair. She was very composed. I will give her that, always the kind of composed that requires effort but does not show the effort. I'd like you to think carefully before you take any action, she said. This affects the whole family. It affects the estate. It affects your brother. I've been thinking about it since March, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she walked to the door. She opened it. She turned back once. I was trying to protect you, she said. I know, I said. I didn't say anything else. She left. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen for a while. The pink had gone out of the sky and the east window showed just the darkening gray now. I thought about the propane furnace closet, the index card taped to the inside of the door, Ruth's handwriting walking through the pilot sequence step by step. Light the match first. Hold it at the pilot port. Then turn the valve. Not before. I went to my desk. I opened the filing box. I found the document, 4 pages, Ruth's signature on the 4th page with the county recorder's stamp in the lower right corner, March 2019 in Ruth's handwriting on the envelope. I looked at it for a long time. Then I called Patricia Morse and left a message telling her to proceed. I let it sit. Then I went to bed. I want to go back to the summer I was 16 because that was the summer Ruth showed me what the cabin actually was. Not the building. I had known the building since I was 4. I mean what it was as a system, as a thing that required understanding to keep alive. That summer she walked me through every mechanical element of the property the way she walked her students through long division, starting at the beginning, explaining each step, not moving forward until the previous step was clear. We started in the crawl space. I had never been in the crawl space before that summer. Ruth handed me a flashlight and a pair of work gloves and explained what I was looking for. The vapor barrier, which was a heavy plastic sheeting that ran across the ground under the cabin to keep moisture from wicking up into the floor joists. I needed to check for tears, for standing water, for signs of animal disturbance. She talked me through it from the access hatch while I moved through the low space on my hands and knees, the flashlight cutting across the plastic sheeting. Tell me what you see, she said. I told her. There was a small tear near the north foundation wall, about 8 inches long, with a piece of gravel that had worked its way through the plastic. She told me exactly how to address it, a piece of patch tape from the toolbox, overlapping the tear by at least 4 inches on each side, pressed flat, and checked for adhesion. I did it. It took maybe 10 minutes. She stood at the hatch and didn't help, which I understood even at 16 was the point. After the crawl space, she showed me the well pump controls. She showed me the pressure tank and explained the relationship between the pressure gauge reading and what it meant about the pump's function. She showed me the main water shutoff and where it was located and why you needed to know where it was located before you needed it. She showed me the junction box and which breakers corresponded to which systems, and she had written this out on a laminated card she kept clipped to the inside of the panel door. She showed me the propane system. She showed me the furnace pilot sequence, walking me through it twice before she let me do it myself. She showed me the exterior tank and how to read the gauge and what percentage meant it was time to call the propane company and what number to call. Then she took me outside and walked the full perimeter of the 2.5 acres. It took 2 hours. She named every boundary marker and explained why each one mattered. She showed me the eastern creek bank and the marker rock and explained the drainage relationship between the creek level and the property's low corner near the access road. She showed me the first stand on the north side and which trees were sound and which had lost significant crown and would need monitoring. She showed me the location of the old dry well that had been capped before she bought the property, and where it was marked on the survey so that nobody drove over it. She didn't tell me I was going to need this someday. She didn't make a speech about legacy or responsibility. She just showed me, thoroughly, the way you show someone something you want them to actually know. At the end of the perimeter walk, we stood at the back of the property where you could hear the creek clearly, and she said, "If you know how a thing works, you can take care of it. If you don't, you're dependent on someone else's judgment about whether it needs caring for." I was 16. I wrote it down in the notebook I kept that summer, which I still have, in the filing box with Ruth's document. The years from 2019 to 2023, the years of Ruth's illness and death, left a particular kind of record in me that is hard to describe precisely without sounding like I am making a claim about sacrifice, which is not what I mean. I am not describing sacrifice. I am describing labor, which is a different thing, specific, physical, countable. I made 41 trips to the cabin between April 2019 and January 2023. I know this because I kept a log, a simple spreadsheet on my laptop with the date, the drive time, the tasks completed, and any expenses. Ruth had not asked me to keep the log. I kept it because she had kept records, and I had learned from her that the record was part of the care. 41 trips. 82 drives of 2 hours each, roughly. The total drive time was approximately 164 hours, not counting the time at the property. The total hours of physical labor at the property across those 4 years, maintenance, repairs, seasonal opening and closing tasks, the riprap job, the roof drain repair, the caulking and pump service, and propane line work, I calculated at 287 hours. I did not pay myself for this time. I did not invoice anyone. I paid for materials out of my own accounts when the amounts were small and did not bother about them, and I submitted larger expenses to the estate account after the probate opened, and 2 of those submissions were reimbursed, and 1 was not. The one that was not reimbursed was the riprap job. $340 in materials, 2 days of labor. I had submitted it in September 2022 with the photograph and the receipt. Beth had said she would look into it. She had not followed up. I had not pressed. I thought about the $340 in the phone room after the Wednesday call, sitting in the chair that had been chosen for durability. I thought about the propane bill that had been reimbursed at $180 for a $347 charge. I thought about the 287 hours and the 164 drive hours and the 41 trips up the peninsula and back. Not because I intended to put a number to it, because the number was there whether I acknowledged it or not, and it seemed important to look at it directly. The county recorder's office had told me, when I called, that the life estate provision was recorded and current, and that no transfer of the subject property would be effective against the named protected party without documented consent. The woman on the phone had said this in the efficient way of someone reading from a statute, but the words themselves were as clean and exact as a well-set boundary marker. No transfer effective without documented consent. My consent had not been documented. My consent had not been sought. My consent had not even been considered, as far as I could tell, in any conversation between my mother and Gerald Ashby. Patricia Morse had confirmed the same. The provision was valid. The sale, as structured, had a problem. A significant one. I sat in my apartment the evening Beth left, and I looked at the filing box on the desk, and I thought about Ruth in her truck on the way back from the county fair, the late summer light, the way she drove, both hands on the wheel, unhurried. She had said something that evening that I had thought about many times since. She said, "The people who built something are usually the last ones asked about what happens to it." She had said it without bitterness, just as an observation about how things tended to go. An observation she had apparently decided in 2019 to do something precise about. I opened the filing box. I took out the life estate provision. I unfolded it on the desk under the lamp. 4 pages. Ruth's handwriting on the envelope. March 2019. Life estate provision. Callaway property, Clallam County. The county recorder's stamp on the first page. The date in blue ink. The file number in the upper right corner. I read it straight through, for the 4th time since I had found it in the cabin's front closet. On the 4th page, below the notary seal, were 2 names in the section labeled Protected Parties. Ruth Eleanor Callaway. Nora Jean Calloway. I set the document down. I looked out the east window. The mountain was not visible at this hour, in the dark, but I knew where it was. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years, and I knew the mountain's position behind the night sky the way I knew the location of every system in the cabin, not from looking at it, but from having been there enough times that the knowledge had become structural. I called Patricia Morse's office and left a message. I said I wanted to move forward. I said I would send her the document first thing in the morning. I let it sit. Then I sat in the kitchen for a long time in the particular quiet of a decision that is already made, and I listened to the refrigerator run, and I thought about the marker rock in the creek and whether anyone had checked the east bank after the winter's rain. Patricia Morse called me on a Monday morning at 8:40. She said the quiet title action was ready to file. She had reviewed the provision again, the county's recording confirmation, and the title company's closing documents from the sale, which Gerald Ashby's office had provided after a formal records request. She said the closing documents showed no disclosure of the life estate provision, no title search notation of a protected interest, and no documented attempt to obtain my consent. "That's a clean record for us," she said. The title company missed it because the provision was recorded under a slightly variant index format, Ruth Calloway versus Ari Calloway, and the automated search didn't flag it. But the recording is valid regardless of the search miss. The interest is real, and it is prior. I asked what filing would accomplish, practically. "It clouds the title," she said. "The buyers can't do anything with the property, can't sell, can't refinance, can't develop until the cloud is resolved. That means they need a resolution, which means your mother needs a resolution, which means everyone involved has a strong reason to come to the table." Asked how long. "Filing is this week," she said. "After that, it depends on how quickly they respond. In my experience with situations like this, the response is fast." I said to file. She said she would send confirmation when it was done. I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table. It was a gray morning, the mountain completely hidden behind low cloud, the kind of Pacific Northwest morning that looks like the sky has simply decided not to commit. I made a second cup of coffee. I sat with it. I thought about the last conversation I had with Ruth that was not medical in nature, not about her comfort or her medications or the logistics of her care. It was in October of 2022, 3 months before she died, in the memory care facility in Olympia. She was having a clear day, which happened less often by then. We sat in the facility's small garden, a square of concrete pavers with raised planters around the edges, nothing like the cabin's back porch, nothing like the creek, and she asked me if I had been up to the property. I said I had been up in August. She said, "How did it look?" I told her about the East Bank, that I had done the riprap the previous June and it had held through the summer. The erosion had stabilized. The marker rock was sitting at the right level going into fall. She nodded. "And the drain," she said. "Fixed," I said. "Proper fitting this time. It'll drain clean now." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the raised planters. Someone had planted kale and late chard, and the chard had gone a deep burgundy at the ribs the way it does in October cold. "Good," she said. She didn't say anything else about the cabin. We talked about other things. But when I was leaving, when I bent to hug her at the garden door, she held my arm for a moment and looked at me. "You know where everything is," she said. It was not a question. It was the same kind of complete sentence she had always used, the ones that meant more than they appeared to on the surface. "I do," I said. She let go of my arm. I drove back to Tacoma in the dark, the 2-hour drive south, and I thought about the index card on the furnace closet door and the laminated card inside the electrical panel and all the other small documents Ruth had made to ensure the knowledge survived her. She had made one more document than anyone knew about. The mediation was held on a Friday in early June in a conference room in Port Angeles. That arrived with Gerald Ashby. Gerald was a tall man in his late 60s with a careful manner and the particular quality of composure that comes from decades of managing other people's difficult situations. He had brought a paralegal. On our side it was Patricia and me. The buyers were represented separately. They had retained their own attorney after the quiet title filing landed, and their title insurance company had called them. Their attorney, a woman named Sokoloff from a Seattle firm, sat at the far end of the table and said very little for the first 40 minutes, which I understood to mean she was watching to see how the primary dispute resolved before deciding what her clients needed. Gerald opened by acknowledging the life estate provision. He said this with the diplomatic precision of someone acknowledging a weather event. Yes, it exists. Now let us discuss what to do with it. He said the family's position was that the provision had been filed without Betty's knowledge and that its application to the December sale created an inequitable outcome for all parties. Patricia said the provision's validity was not contingent on Betty's knowledge of it. Gerald said he understood that. He then proposed that I accept a payment from the estate, a figure reflecting my protected interest, in exchange for a recorded release of the provision. He named the figure, $95,000. The room was quiet for a moment. The property sold for $512,000, Patricia said. The protected interest is not a full ownership interest, Gerald said. It is a blocking interest, Patricia said. Without Miss Calloway's consent, the sale is void. The buyers cannot hold clear title. Their title insurance carrier is currently reviewing exposure. The figure you've named does not reflect that blocking value. Beth had been sitting with her hands folded since the meeting started. She looked at Gerald, then at me. Nora, she said, I want you to understand that nothing that happened was intended to harm you. The decision was made in a difficult time, under pressure, with your recovery as the primary concern. I did not know about the document. If I had known, you would have obtained my consent, I said. She stopped. That is what the provision requires, I said. My written, notarized consent. Before the sale, I was available. I was 17 days from discharge when the sale closed. A phone call was possible. She was quiet. Patricia slid a one-page document across the table to Gerald. Our counter, she said. Gerald read it. His expression did not change, but something in his posture recalibrated, a small adjustment of his shoulders. The counter was not a payment. The counter was a deed. A corrected deed, naming me as co-title holder on the property, with a corresponding reduction in the sale distribution to Bet and the estate to reflect my interest's market value. Patricia had calculated the figure at $187,000, based on the blocking interest valuation methodology she had outlined in a separate memorandum that she now placed in front of Gerald. Sokoloff, from the far end of the table, picked up her copy of the memorandum and began reading it. Gerald looked at the counter. He looked at Bet. Bet looked at me. I reached into the folder on the table in front of me. I took out the life estate provision, the original, for pages, Ruth's handwriting on the envelope, the county recorder's stamp on page 1. I laid it flat on the table. I turned it to the 4th page and set my finger below the 2 names in the protected party section. My grandmother filed this in March of 2019, I said. She explained it to me. She told me the county had my name. She told me because she wanted me to know it existed. I looked at Bet. You told me you were protecting me, I said. You told me a phone call would have added to my burden. You told me you didn't know the document existed. I let each sentence settle before the next. The document existed, I said. The county has had it for 4 years. The knowledge that it existed did not depend on you. I did not raise my voice. I did not look away. I'm going to accept the corrected deed and the adjusted distribution, I said. Not because $187,000 is the number I would have named, Patricia can tell you it isn't, but because I am not interested in the buyers losing their home over a title search error that was not their fault. I want the corrected deed recorded. I want the adjustment reflected in the estate accounting. And I want it done before anyone leaves this room. I stood. You said the decision was made with my recovery as the primary concern, I said to Bet. The provision is how I make sure the next decision gets made with the property as the primary concern, the way Ruth intended. I sat back down. I folded my hands on the table. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Sokoloff set down the memorandum and said, to no one in particular, my clients would like to resolve this today. The deed amendment was executed at 2:23 in the afternoon. Patricia kept the original provision. I was given a certified copy of the amended deed, which I placed in the envelope with Ruth's handwriting and returned to the filing box. We were in the parking lot by 3 o'clock. The The sky had cleared over the course of the day, and the afternoon light on the Olympic Range was the particular gold of early June, the snow still on the upper peaks, the lower slopes already going green. Patricia said, walking to her car, "She planned this." I said I thought so. "The variant index format," she said. Ari Calloway instead of Ruth Calloway. A title search would miss it on automation. A person looking for it would find it. I had thought about this. I didn't know if Ruth had done it deliberately, if she had understood enough about how title searches worked to create a provision that would survive an automated search miss while remaining valid. She might have. She was precise about things that mattered. She might simply have given the county her name the way she always signed documents, with the middle initials she used on formal paperwork, and the rest had followed from that. I didn't know. It seemed like the kind of thing Ruth would have known and not mentioned. Patricia said she would follow up on the recording confirmation within the week. She shook my hand. I drove north. I went to the cabin the following Saturday. I didn't call ahead. The buyers were not there. They had told their attorney they were in Seattle for the summer, opening the cabin on weekends when they could manage it. I parked at the bottom of the gravel lane and sat for a moment. The creek was audible from the road. A varied thrush called once from the first stand and then went quiet. I walked up the lane. I did not go to the door. I went around the east side of the cabin to the bank where I had laid the riprap in the rain 2 summers ago. It had held. The bank was stable, the marker rock sitting at the right level for early June, the creek running clear and fast with the snowmelt. I checked the east roof drain from below, looked up at the angle of the fitting, the way the water stain on the fascia below it had faded since the repair. Clean. I stood at the back of the property where you could hear the creek clearly, and I looked at the first stand and the old-growth canopy and the particular quality of light that came through it in late afternoon. Some things hold because someone made a specific decision to make them hold, not a grand decision. A sequence of small, specific, unremarkable decisions over a long time, each one made because the alternative was to let something deteriorate that did not need to. The cabin did not know any of this. It simply stood, maintained, the systems running, the bank stable, the drain clean. That was enough. That had always been enough. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know these stories don't resolve because someone made a scene or said the perfectly cutting thing at the perfect moment. They resolve because someone paid attention for a long time and kept the receipts, the literal ones and the other kind. The corrected deed is recorded. My name is in the Clallam County system, the way it has been since March of 2019 when my grandmother filed a 4-page document and put it in an envelope with her handwriting on the outside and placed it in the filing box in the cabin's front closet, where it waited for the moment it was needed. She told me I would know when that was. She was right. If this story reached you today, if you've ever been the one who showed up quietly for years and then had to show the receipts, share it with someone who needs to hear that the quiet ones don't always stay quiet. It takes one tap, and it means more than you know. I'm Nora. I'll see you in the next one. In the week between Patricia filing the quiet title action and the mediation date, I drove up to the peninsula once. Not to the cabin. I drove to the county recorder's office in Port Angeles, and I asked to see the original recorded document in person. I don't know exactly why I needed to do this. Patricia had the file number and the recording confirmation and a certified copy, and I had my own copy from the filing box, and nothing about seeing the original in the county's physical record would change anything legal or strategic. But I drove up anyway, 2 hours north on a Tuesday morning, and I sat across a counter from a records clerk who brought out the document in a manila sleeve and placed it in front of me. It was Ruth's provision. The county's copy, not a scan, not a photocopy, but the original document that had been submitted for recording in March of 2019 and assigned a file number and placed in the county's permanent record. Ruth's signature on the 4th page was the same as the copy I had, the same deliberate, slightly formal cursive she used for important documents, the middle initial centered between the first and last name, the notary stamp in blue ink to the right. The file number was stamped on the first page in red. Below it, in the county's own format, was the recording date, March 14, 2019. 2 weeks, Patricia had told me, before Ruth's cancer diagnosis. Not after. Before, when Ruth was still in full health, when there was no urgency that anyone outside her own head could see, when she had simply decided, in the same unhurried, methodical way she had decided everything, that it was time to make the thing precise. I sat with the document for a few minutes. The clerk was at her desk, doing other work. The office was quiet in the way of county offices in small towns, the particular institutional quiet of a place where the work is not glamorous, but the work matters. I thought about Ruth at 26 showing me the cedar box. No, that was the vineyard story. That was Lena's story. I thought about Ruth at the back of the property, walking the perimeter, naming each boundary marker. I thought about her standing at the crawlspace hatch while I moved through the low space on my hands and knees, telling me to say what I saw.
Tell me what you see.
What I saw, in the county recorder's office on that Tuesday morning, was a document that had been sitting in a public record for 4 years, available to anyone who looked for it. Filed under Ari Calloway, which an automated title search would miss, and a human eye looking at the actual index would find in under a minute. I thought about what Patricia had said in the parking lot afterward, that Ruth might have understood how title searches worked, that the variant format might have been deliberate. I thought about the laminated card inside the electrical panel, the index card on the furnace closet door, the marker rock painted white on one side. Ruth's entire approach to information was the same: make it available to the person who is paying attention. Let it wait for whoever was actually looking. She had made the provision available. She had told me it was there. She had trusted that when the moment came, I would look. I thanked the clerk. I drove back to Tacoma. The mountain was fully visible on the way home, south-facing, the snow still thick on the upper third, the afternoon light catching the glaciers on the east shoulder. I drove toward it for a long time before the road curved away. There is something I kept coming back to in the months after the mediation, something I couldn't quite resolve into a clean thought. Ruth had filed the provision in March of 2019. She had told me about it on a Sunday afternoon on the back porch, in April of the same year. At that point, neither of us had any reason to believe it would ever need to be used. Ruth was healthy. The cabin was hers. The question of what happened to it after she died seemed distant in the ordinary way that such questions seem distant when the person is still alive and present and sitting across from you with a River Clay coffee mug. She filed the document and told me about it not because she thought it would be needed immediately, but because she thought clearly about what she was doing with the property and wanted the record to reflect her actual intentions rather than an interpretation of them. She had watched her own mother's estate become a site of interpretation. I knew this from things she had said over the years, in the sideways way she talked about things that had mattered and then resolved, and she had decided that when her turn came, she would be exact. She would write it down. She would file it. She would make sure the person she intended to protect knew the document existed. She did all three. My mother had made a decision with the best intentions she could manage, from a position of limited information, under pressure, and with a genuine belief that she was doing the right thing. I understood that. I had always understood it in the same way I understood that understanding it did not change what the document said. Some things are true regardless of intent. The provision was one of those things. The cabin is still the buyer's cabin. My name on the county's record did not change that. The corrected deed and the adjusted distribution did not give me the cabin back. They gave me what the provision was designed to give me: recognition. Formal, recorded, irreversible recognition that the property had not been mine to lose without being asked. That was what Ruth had wanted. Not a fight. Not a reversal. An asking. She had made sure that the asking was required.